guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome. My name is Zoe, but most people know me as the Reptiles, and this is Percy. And for some reason, he's going to be the star of an iguana video. Ideally, I'd have 𝘼𝙬𝙗𝙗 out right now, but Percy is pretty content. Maybe I'll bring 𝘼𝙬𝙗𝙗 out later, but yeah, Percy he's chilling, he's hanging out. So we're gonna talk about iguana enclosures while I have an anole on my head. So hopefully you guys can take me somewhat seriously during this video. So for this video, I want to talk about building your own iguana enclosure. Now, I'm not going into the nitty-gritty details of the insides and the lighting and all of that stuff. This is more or less just the building part. Now, when it comes to owning an iguana, you cannot get away with not building an enclosure or dumping a ton of money into a already made or custom enclosure. You cannot go to PetSmart and buy an enclosure for a full-grown iguana. Doesn't exist. You have to plan for a 6-foot-long lizard. 6-foot-long lizard needs a really big enclosure. There's no way to get around that. So just starting with the sizes, because it is a 6-foot lizard, the height of your enclosure should be a minimum of 6 feet. They are arboreal. They want to feel like they are up in a tree and makes them more comfortable and stress-free. 6 foot high is the minimum for a enclosure, the height. Now for the length, you want it ideally to be double the length of your iguana. And then for the depth, at least half the length of your iguana. Now some of you are probably thinking about my enclosure for 𝘼𝙬𝙗𝙗 and thinking, So 𝘼𝙬𝙗𝙗 was much smaller when we built that, and he is stunted, so he's not really getting much bigger than he is now, and he's still about the size of a 1-year-old iguana, even though he's like 4. So he is fairly small. That enclosure does work for him. It was built for a handicap iguana. We had to keep in mind that he is handicapped, and that enclosure had to travel with me for at least 3 years. So that is why that enclosure is that way. But we are working on new plans for him and changing things up. So he will probably not be in that enclosure too much longer. However, that enclosure is really freaking tall. It is definitely over 6 foot tall. The enclosure itself is 6 foot tall, but then when you add on the wheels and the legs, it makes it even taller. So too small of an enclosure can lead to injuries, mainly due to them trying to get out. So they'll be rubbing, they could get nose injuries, they could damage their toes or their nails, and sometimes, you know, if it's too small and they're not getting enough exercise, they'll become very weak because their muscles will not be, they won't be getting used. So that's also something you want to avoid. So you also want to keep in mind that they have very high heat requirements and they have UVB requirements. So you have to plan whether you're going to be putting those lights inside of the enclosure or outside of the enclosure. If you're putting them inside of the enclosure, you want to make sure you have protection such as bulb guards. That way your iguana cannot actually access the light and burn itself. If you're putting them outside the enclosure, you want to keep in mind what it is you're putting them, like what the outside is made of, because UVB does not penetrate things very well. If you use a mesh or a screen, a lot of the UVB gets filtered out by that mesh or screen before it actually goes into the enclosure. So those are all things you want to keep in mind. And then part of the reason that size is so important is because they need to be able to get away from the heat and from the UVB. You want a gradient, and for a large lizard like that, you need a large enclosure to be able to create an adequate gradient for them. It's also important to plan how you're going to keep heat and humidity inside of your enclosure because they do have such high requirements. So for humidity, think about whether you're going to be setting up a humidifier system, a misting system, or you're just going to spray them multiple times a day, stuff like that. But ventilation is also very important. You just don't want too much ventilation because then you lose all that heat and humidity. So a good thing to do would just be adding some vents or some holes, some small ones at the top of the enclosure because heat rises. So small vents up there for a little bit to go out, so you're not losing all your heat, but so that some comes out, and then more vents or bigger vents at the bottom of the enclosure, so when that heat escapes the top, fresh air is being pulled into the enclosure. You're slipping, whoop. So now I want to talk about the materials that you use to build, and I think this is the most important part. This is the part that I have been wanting to talk about for a while, and it's also the part that might tick some people off. My opinions might upset some people, but keep in mind that they are just my opinions, so you might have a different opinion, and that is okay. So in my opinion, the best things to use would be some sort of wood, whether it's plywood or a heavier, more expensive wood like oak or walnut, because it looks nice, but it's also a little heavier and expensive. But any wood like that, you create a nice, sturdy enclosure. It's easy to keep heat and humidity in, and it looks nice. They're good materials to use. And then to be able to see into your exhibit or your enclosure, I personally like plexiglass, using it as a door. That's what my door is for Arcadius. His is plexiglass on PVC, so we kind of made our own door. So I really like that. It helps keep stuff trapped in, but you can still see inside, see your iguana, so plexiglass works great. So I started mentioning Arcadius's enclosure earlier. If you saw my videos, one of my first videos, I think, where I talked about how we built his enclosure. His enclosure was actually made out of a shelving unit, and then we wrapped a bamboo fence around it, and then I wrapped a shower curtain around that to help keep in heat and humidity. And then, like I said, we used a plexiglass to make a door. So we also did it keeping in mind, we would have used plywood and all that other wood. We had to keep in mind that I was still in college, so that enclosure had to travel with me to and from college. So we needed something that was lightweight and could fit in the car and go through doorways and everything. So once I was settled and done with college, we figured that's when we'd revisit making him a new enclosure. If I could do that enclosure over again, I would have gone with a deeper shelving unit. We thought about ordering a deeper shelving unit to start off with, but I was super impatient and wanted to just start right away. So we went with what Home Depot had, but if I could do it over, I would go with a deeper shelving unit. I couldn't go longer because it wouldn't fit in my parents' car, but that one fits perfectly in the car. But soon, hopefully, I'll be done moving around and can revisit it. But like I said, we've got kind of another one in the works, in the process, in the thoughts, so just hang tight for that. But back to enclosures. So I said the best thing, are you getting ready to jump? Yes, you are. I'm gonna go put him back. Okay, so now I'm back and I have Arcadius, so we're gonna keep going. So this is the part where people will probably get a little mad at me, and ouch, here, go that way. Sharp nails, you need a nail trim. So this is the part where people will probably get a little upset with me. I do not agree with the use of wire or mesh or screen for an iguana's enclosure. I think it's kind of the cheap, easy, lazy way out of building an enclosure. I know a lot of people do it. In the right environment, I guess it could work. Like for an outdoor enclosure, fine, because you're getting fresh air. If it's hot and humid, you're getting the UVB, fine. Don't you climb the tapestry. Don't you do it. Many screens or meshes aren't strong enough to hold a full-grown iguana, and they can be kind of dangerous for the iguana. If the iguana starts rubbing on it or trying to climb it, it can do damage to their toes, do worse damage to their nose than, say, rubbing on plexiglass would, in my opinion. They're also much harder to keep heat and humidity in because it's essentially just a bunch of holes letting everything out. So unless you live in a very warm, humid place where you don't have to worry about all of that, I do not think that... What are you doing? I do not think that any wiring or mesh makes for a very good iguana enclosure. Now, can you use it in parts? sure, okay, if you want to use it on the door, so it's just like the front or like a little bit here or there, then okay. But I don't think the whole entire enclosure should be made of a mesh or wiring, because I get questions all the time, how do you keep it, like how do you keep it humid inside of that? And you have to stay on top of it, spraying constantly or having a misting system or humidifier just constantly going. Like there's really no good answer other than just you have to stay on top of it. Where with other setups like a wood enclosure, it traps humidity much better. What are you doing? Hi, buddy. Can you sit with me? Can't see him, but he's sitting next to me. See if I can show you. Not quite. There he is. Oh, ow, my thigh. Ow, sharp nails. Ow, ow, ow. Good boy. Yes, you are. Such a good boy. So yeah, they're a great source of ventilation. They do not hold heat or humidity at all, and they can be damaging and not hold up to a full-grown iguana. So in my personal opinion, I would stay away from using mesh and wires and screens for an enclosure. You're gonna fall. I would opt more for something sturdy, like some sort of wood. So like I said, that might upset some people because I know a lot of iguana owners do use wire or mesh or screen. I just personally wouldn't. I don't think it makes for a very good enclosure for what they need. But, you know, it's up to you. You do your research. Maybe you live somewhere where that works for you. Being in New York, where it's really cold and dry, that doesn't work for me. So, you know, it's up to you. That's just personally what I think. Okay, bye. Jumped off the bed and now he's leaving the room. So then, of course, inside you want tons of climbing opportunities. Not only vertical, but a lot of horizontal opportunities. So whether you get lots of wood or something, I go out to the river and I find big pieces of driftwood, and then I take them home and I treat them, and then we use that. So I have a lot of driftwood pieces in his enclosure right now, on top of, I think, like 2x4s that I wrapped with twine so that he can grip onto them easier. So just stuff like that. A lot of different climbing opportunities. Big, thick platforms where they can lay down and be comfortable is really good. So that's kind of the fun part, where you get to design the inside. So there's a lot of different things you can do with that. And then, of course, you want to make sure you have somewhere to put their food, somewhere to put a large tub of water that they can climb into, and another source of water that they can drink from. So those are all things just to keep in mind when planning on building an iguana enclosure. So a lot of things you have to think about before you start. So I hope that helps, gives you guys some things to think about to help you out with building an iguana enclosure. And yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching. See you for the next video. I'm gonna go get Arcadius before he gets into trouble.